The night they took my house, the air still smelled like apple cobbler and lavender soap. My father folded his napkin like it was a business deal, not a betrayal. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. And as my sisters stood in the doorway, holding my old suitcase, I realized they hadn't just come for dinner, they'd come for everything. That's how it ended. Not with shouting or slammed doors, but with quiet precision, like a plan rehearsed long before I ever held the keys. What they did wasn't sudden, it was years in the making. Every favor, we're just trying to help. Every small correction, it had all been leading here. By the time I understood what they were taking from me, they'd already rewritten the story and cast me as the ungrateful daughter who didn't belong in her own home. My name's Marissa, and that night was supposed to be a celebration. My first dinner as a homeowner, my first attempt to show them that I'd built something of my own, without their money, without their supervision, without their constant need to fix me. I'd been up since sunrise, scrubbing and polishing, lighting candles that smelled like eucalyptus and hope. The table was perfect, Grandma's old china, the soft blue rims faded but familiar. Name cards printed at work, arranged with care, Dad at the head, Mom beside him, Erin, my sister, across from me, where she could see everything. It wasn't a dinner table, it was a peace offering disguised as a meal. At 6:35, tires crunched over the gravel driveway. My pulse kicked. I adjusted the wine bottle one last time, smoothed my skirt, and smiled the kind of smile that begs for approval. When I opened the door, Erin walked in first, her suede boots leaving faint dust on the floors I'd just cleaned. "Smells like food," she said, like it was a complaint. Dad followed, scanning the room with the detached curiosity of a real estate agent. "This place has good bones," he murmured. "Feels like it should belong to everyone, doesn't it?" I laughed, small, uncertain. "It's cozy, I think." Mom entered last, silent. Her fingers traced the edge of the mantel where I'd framed an old family photo, back when affection didn't feel like a transaction. We sat. The salad wilted untouched. Erin scrolled under the table. Dad asked how I afforded the floors. "A house this size is a lot for one person." "It's manageable," I said, my smile tightening. No one mentioned my promotion. No one asked if I was happy. When dessert came, I brought out the cobbler, still warm from the oven, and waited for something, anything. A compliment, a flicker of pride. Mom's fork hovered mid-air. She looked at the cobbler, then at me, and for a second I saw the woman who used to hum in the kitchen, not the stranger across from me. "Elaine?" Dad's voice cut through the pause. She blinked, as if waking from a thought she wasn't supposed to have. "Robert," she started, but stopped herself. The silence snapped tight. Dad folded his napkin, deliberate and slow. When he looked up, his eyes were steel. I'd seen that look before, when I got into an out-of-state program, when I bought my car without asking permission. Only this time I could feel it in my bones. This wasn't disapproval. This was eviction, wrapped in parental love. Dad's napkin lay folded, neatly beside his plate, a white flag disguised as civility. I caught Mom's eyes just once. Her fork hovered midair, unmoving. She looked at the cobbler I'd baked, the one she used to make when I was 10, back when comfort didn't come with conditions. For a second, something flickered across her face. Not guilt exactly, but memory. "Elaine," Dad's voice cut through it, soft but sharp. Her fingers twitched, the fork scraped the plate. "Robert," she began, but the word collapsed before it reached a sentence. He didn't even look at her. just straightened his cufflinks, the signal. That was the moment it all shifted. The moment she stopped being my mother and became his accomplice. Whatever she wanted to say drowned under the weight of habit. Obedience, preservation, whatever name you give, the kind of silence that buys safety. When my father finally spoke, it wasn't anger I heard, it was execution. "We've discussed it," he said, his tone smooth as paperwork. "This house should come back to the family." He said it like he was returning a borrowed sweater, not dismantling my life. That's how they operated, never with confrontation, always with composure. They didn't raise voices, they rewrote definitions. Love became ownership. Family became leverage. And I stood there, realizing that every warm word they'd ever offered came with invisible fine print. By the time I understood what they were really saying, my home wasn't being shared. It was being reclaimed. Mom didn't look at me when she nodded. "You've done well, sweetheart," she said softly. "But it's too much house for one person. We think it's time you refocus." Across the table, Erin leaned back in her chair, arms folded, expression blank. "It's not personal," she added, as if betrayal ever was. Dad adjusted his cufflinks. "Your old room's still there. We'll be moving in next week. Ryan's already drawn up renovation plans." For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. My pulse roared in my ears. Then I was on my feet so fast the chair screeched across the floor. "You're what?" "I don't want this to get emotional," Mom said, her tone clipped, polite, dismissive. "It's just a house, Marissa." Just a house. I didn't even notice Erin leave the room until she came back, dragging a green suitcase I hadn't seen in years, the one I took to college, the one that still smelled faintly of detergent and nervous beginnings. She set it down gently beside me. "We packed your essentials," she said. "This way it's smooth." I stared at her. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. My voice was trapped somewhere behind my ribs. Finally, I managed, "I'm the legal owner." Dad's smile barely moved. "We'll sort that." I didn't cry. That would have given them too much. Instead, I reached for my phone, my wallet, and the keys I'd polished that morning. Like an idiot, trying to make them shine for approval that never existed. I laid them neatly beside my untouched glass of wine. No one stopped me. Outside, the air bit colder than it should have. I didn't cry. I just drove. No direction, no destination. Until the highway turned silver under the streetlights. Every mile put more distance between me and the lie I'd called family. By the time I stopped, I wasn't running anymore. I was regrouping. The next morning, the sun rose like it didn't care who owned what. That's when my phone rang, Crestview Bank on the line. "Ms. Hall, we've detected unauthorized attempts to change ownership on your mortgage." The words didn't shock me. What shocked me was the calm in my chest when I said, "Send me everything you have." "Of course. And Ms. Hall, I'm sorry." When the call ended, I sat in my car staring at the steering wheel. The old me would have driven to Nora's, crying, asking what to do. Instead, I turned the car around, back toward the house, toward them. The driveway was empty. Perfect. I parked at the curb, slipped on gloves, and walked to the porch light. Still burning lavender bright, my mother's favorite. I unscrewed the bulb, pocketed it. Small thing, but symbolic. Inside, through the window, I saw the life they'd already started. Boxes labeled family room, a vase I didn't own, my couch pushed against a wall I'd painted myself. I lifted my phone, opened the security app, and added a new camera, one they couldn't reach, tucked beneath the eave. a silent witness, mine. When I drove away, my hands weren't shaking anymore. For the first time since dinner, I wasn't the daughter they dismissed. I was the problem they'd underestimated. Instead, I drove across town and parked outside Nora's apartment building. She was the one person who never asked for explanations, who didn't attach conditions to love. I sat there for hours, watching the sky fade to indigo, my body still, my mind unraveling. The weight of it all settled on my shoulders like wet cement. What would I even say? My family changed the locks, installed a stranger, and erased me over dinner? It was almost dark when Nora found me still parked outside. She didn't ask questions. She just opened the passenger door, slid into the seat beside me, and sat there quietly. "I need to grab a few things," I said finally, "from what used to be my home." She nodded once. "Let's go." The drive back was silent. The house looked darker now, the porch light off. The stranger was gone. Nora stood watch while I peered through a narrow gap in the blinds. The living room glowed from within, soft and foreign. Someone was moving furniture. Framed photos lined the mantel, none of them mine. The porch light next door flicked on. An older man in a windbreaker stepped out, squinting. "You Marissa?" I nodded. "They've been in and out for weeks," he said quietly. "Always when you were gone. Figured it wasn't my place to say." Nora's voice cut through the chill like tempered steel. "You need a lawyer." Tonight later, at her kitchen table, she poured coffee into a chipped mug I recognized from her first apartment. She didn't fill the silence with pity. She didn't ask for details. She just slid the mug across to me and waited, patient, solid, while I tried to find the words for what didn't yet feel real. I sat at Nora's kitchen table with my hands wrapped around a chipped mug, tracing the tiny crack in its glaze as if it could hold me together. Her words landed like a gavel. "They didn't just push you out," she said quietly. "They planned it." In that moment, the air got heavier, like bricks being stacked on my chest. This wasn't a family fight gone too far. It wasn't a moment of heat or misunderstanding. It was a blueprint I'd walked into with my casserole still hot from the oven. I realized then that I hadn't been ambushed at dinner. I'd been moved into position years ago. I nodded once, still staring at the mug. "The neighbor said they've been in and out for weeks." "This isn't miscommunication, Marissa," Nora said, folding her hands. "This was organized." I didn't respond. My throat was tight, my lungs heavy. One cold realization at a time. They hadn't just acted, they'd rehearsed. They'd built scaffolding around my life while smiling in my face. Finally, I said it. "I want a lawyer." My voice didn't shake. "Someone who's seen families pretend love while plotting theft." Nora's eyes softened for just a heartbeat. "I know someone." Later, alone in her guest room, still in my jeans and hoodie, the memory returned uninvited. I was 22, home from college for a weekend to get paperwork notarized. Passing the den, I heard my name through a cracked door. "She'll sign," my father had said. "Once she does, it's ours to manage." Then a laugh, my sister Erin's, sharp and amused. "She's clueless." Back then, I told myself it was taxes, some minor errand I'd misunderstood. I didn't press. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to believe they saw me as a tool instead of a daughter. But lying there in the dim glow of Nora's guest lamp, I understood. That moment wasn't the beginning. It was just the first time I glimpsed the framework they were building around me. The next morning, Nora drove me to a small office downtown to meet Barbara Herrera. Her handshake was dry and firm, her voice clipped but not unkind. She listened while Nora laid out the story, glancing at me now and then, as if measuring how far I'd been pushed before fighting back. "You're not the first," Barbara said simply. "People think real estate theft only happens between strangers. It doesn't. The worst of it happens between people with matching last names." I signed the initial paperwork with a pen that felt heavier than it should. Barbara outlined the next steps like a field surgeon. Document everything. Don't engage emotionally. Forward all communication. Secure your records. It was clinical, procedural, and strangely grounding. For the first time in days, I felt like I was doing something more than just surviving. That night, Nora sat beside me as I logged into my cloud storage. Years ago, I'd installed cameras in the house for safety. Motion triggered, automatically backed up. I hadn't checked them since moving in, but now there they were, my mother, Mara, calmly sorting through the drawers in my office. My sister, Erin, holding one of my photo frames, sliding out the picture and slipping in one of her and Dad. My father, Robert, seated at my desk, typing, then leaning back, like he was trying out a throne. They didn't look like trespassers. They looked at home, like I'd been the interruption. "I didn't leave," I said aloud. "They were already moving in." My absence just made it official. Nora didn't say a word. She didn't have to. I clicked through more footage and another tab caught my eye. My home phone account. A saved voicemail dated 2 weeks before the dinner. I hit play. "Once she's out," Erin's voice came through, sharp and clean. "Don't let her back in." Not even for the photo albums, I sat frozen. The voice wasn't angry, it was bored, like she was talking about moving a box of junk. I woke before dawn, the sky still the color of unpolished steel. Nora was asleep, the apartment quiet except for the hum of her fridge. I slipped out with nothing but my keys and a candle, the one that had sat on my kitchen counter since move-in day. Eucalyptus and sage, the scent of beginnings. My house, their house now, stood in silence when I pulled up, curtains drawn, no cars in the driveway. I didn't knock. I just walked to the porch, set the candle on the step, and lit it. The tiny flame bent under the wind but didn't die. Then I reached beneath the porch rail where I'd once hidden a spare key, and pulled out something else. An old photo frame wrapped in a grocery bag, my grandmother's. I'd stashed it there the night they changed the locks, half hoping, half afraid I'd ever come back for it. I unwrapped it slowly. Her handwriting was still visible on the back. "You are allowed to own your life." I stood there, holding that frame against the dawn, realizing this wasn't about reclaiming a house. It was about remembering who I was before they convinced me I owed them everything. When I left, the candle was still burning, a thin flame in the morning light. It wasn't a plea, it was a warning. By late afternoon, the tremor in my hands had been replaced by something steadier. Not calm exactly, but a click inside me, like my soul exhaling and turning its face toward battle. I sat at Nora's kitchen table, laptop open, scanning through folders I hadn't touched since closing on the house. Documents, PDFs, signatures, all the small victories that made this place mine in the eyes of the law. Even if my family had rewritten the story in their heads, the truth was here. A scanned copy of the release of lien, dated, signed, notarized. Full payment made 6 months ago. The closing statement from the mortgage company. The title deed marked sole ownership, my name and only mine, printed in black ink that suddenly felt holy. I forwarded them to Barbara, no subject line, just attachments. Then I whispered it aloud to make it real. No more trying to be the good daughter. That evening, I opened my laptop and turned my home security footage into a crime scene. What was once a collection of harmless clips, raccoons on the porch, delivery drivers at the door, had become evidence. Frame by frame, it showed not strangers breaking in, but my own family moving in. It wasn't chaos, it was choreography. My mother sliding open my drawers like an appraiser, my sister quietly arranging her books on my shelves, my father replacing my router with one marked in faded Sharpie, like a flag claiming new territory. They weren't trespassing, they were settling, as if I had evaporated. Every clip I saved, every timestamp I labeled, built a quiet case. I named the folder, they took it, and as I shut the laptop, my palms were damp. Not from fear, but from a fury so cold it felt surgical. The next morning, over weak coffee, I said it aloud to Nora for the first time. They stole my house. She didn't flinch. She just nodded once, slow and deliberate. They underestimated you, she said. That's their mistake. There were no fireworks in that moment, no cinematic breakdown, just a quiet truth hanging in the air. Something inside me shifted. I wasn't asking for validation anymore. I wasn't waiting to be believed. I picked up my phone, squared my shoulders, and hit record. My name is Marissa Lane, I said into the lens. This is a record of what was taken from me by people who share my blood. This is not for sympathy. This is for documentation. I saved the clip to the same hard drive as the footage. Later that afternoon, Barbara emailed over a draft of the cease and desist letter. 8 pages long, it read like poetry disguised as legal language. Each sentence a correction to the false narrative they'd tried to write about me. I printed it, sat on Nora's floor with my back against her bookshelf, and read every word out loud. When I finished, I folded the letter in thirds, sealed the envelope myself. My hands shook, but I didn't cry. That night, I slept without dreaming. At dawn, my phone was already ringing. Vernon's name flashed across the screen. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, another buzz. This time I listened. His voice slid through the speaker, low and measured. You just started something you won't be able to finish. For the first time, I smiled, because finally I was being heard. The voicemail sat in my inbox like a grenade with the pin half pulled. I poured coffee I wouldn't drink, stared out the window at Mulberry Street, and tapped play again. Same voice, same quiet threat disguised as fatherly concern. I forwarded it to Barbara with a single line. This is how they escalate. She replied within minutes. We expected this, now we pressure harder. I called the mortgage lender next, needing confirmation everything was locked down. But the tone on the other end had changed. I'm sorry, Miss Lane, the rep said. Due to the legal involvement, we're unable to provide additional information without a formal request from your attorney. The bank had gone quiet. They're making noise behind the scenes, Nora said, trying to contain the story. Keep it in the family, I nodded. It's not in the family anymore. Barbara filed the affidavit with the county clerk by noon. I signed the form with ink that bled just slightly on the page. There it was, Marissa E. Lane, sole legal owner. The signature looked like mine. It felt like mine. This wasn't permission anymore. It was a declaration. Around 3, I texted Clayton. Me? You free for coffee? He replied almost immediately. Sure, usual place. We hadn't spoken much since our breakup last fall, but he had always been a neutral zone, steady, even-keeled, someone who didn't pick sides. Maybe hearing it out loud from someone with distance would help me make sense of the madness. He arrived first, halfway through an Americano when I walked in. "Hey, stranger," he said, standing just enough to be polite. I sat, wrapping my hands around the ceramic cup, even though it burned. "So my family tried to steal my house." He blinked, tilted his head like a dog catching a sound it couldn't place. "Wait, like, actually?" "Yes, changed the locks, put a stranger inside, told the bank they were co-owners." His expression shifted from surprise to discomfort. "That's rough," he said, "but they're still your parents, right?" That word, parents, felt like a knife. "Maybe just let them cool off," he added. "Families go through weird stuff." "They didn't lose their temper," I said quietly. "They submitted forged documents. They installed themselves like they were moving into a vacation rental." Clayton's shrug landed like a slap. "It just sounds like a misunderstanding," he said. My mother had repacked my dishes, my father forged papers, my sister installed herself in my home. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a takeover wearing a family name. I stood up, my voice steady. "People who don't believe you when you speak softly don't deserve to hear you roar." His mouth opened to reply, but I was already walking away. Back at Nora's, surrounded by papers and Post-its, sprawled across the floor like a crime board, I realized I wasn't preparing for a fight anymore. I was building a case. Nora joined me, still in her court shoes, unbothered by the chaos. "Restraining order?" she asked. "Maybe at least a lien protection filing," I replied. "I want layers. I want their legal feet tangled every time they try to move." She nodded once. "Good. They're counting on you to stay emotional. This isn't personal to them, it's transactional." Her words stuck, not because they were new, but because I finally believed them. I opened the voicemail again, the one where Aaron had said, "Don't let her back in." Not even for the photo albums. Her voice wasn't angry. It was bored, efficient, and now I understood why. That night, I tried logging into my home's smart system. My credentials were denied, password changed, settings wiped. It was no longer my house. It had been renamed the Tate family home. I drove by just after sunset. The porch light burned harsh blue instead of the soft amber I'd chosen. Through the window, I saw new portraits lining the wall, family photos, but not mine. My father and mother, beaming in outdated poses. My sister holding her dog. A sepia wedding photo. My face was gone. And in that moment, it hit me. They weren't just evicting me. They were rewriting the story entirely. By mid-morning, the cold had settled around my wrists like iron cuffs. I parked across the street from what used to be my home. Not a home now, just a structure I'd built with purpose and pride, stripped and hollowed by people who called themselves family. In my hand was a manila envelope holding the cease and desist letter Barbara had finalized, along with supporting ownership documents. Everything printed, signed, time-stamped, cleaner than anything they'd ever tried to sneak past a notary. I didn't walk to the door. I passed the papers to the sheriff's deputy. He nodded curtly before heading up the path. I stayed on the sidewalk, the smell of pine mulch from the neighbor's yard mixing with exhaust from passing cars. As the deputy knocked, I looked through the front window. They'd taken it further. My photos gone. The one of me holding my degree beside the car I'd paid for myself, gone. The art over the fireplace replaced with a mass-printed barn scene. Storage bins once filled with my camping gear now taped with labels. in handwriting I didn't recognize. Their handwriting, they hadn't just moved me out, they were deleting me. I turned to leave but caught something in the alley behind the fence. A corner of one of my bookshelves propped awkwardly next to two garbage bags. The shelf had a long split down the back, like it had been dropped hard. One bag was loosely tied, and when the wind shifted, I caught a scent I hadn't smelled in years. Lavender and rosewater, my grandmother's sachets. She used to tuck them between towels, and I had inherited the last few after her funeral. They'd thrown them away. I snapped a photo on my phone, backed it up, and sent it straight to Barbara. Subject line, evidence of erasure. By early afternoon, Nora and I were back at her apartment, papers spread across the floor like a quilt of consequence. Barbara joined us via speakerphone. I laid out the title deed again, the payoff statement, the clean chain of ownership. This, I said, tapping the closing date, is when it became mine. No cosigners, no shared debt, no transfer agreements. Barbara's voice came through crisp. Good. We'll present this with the footage. I nodded. My voice was calm. I don't need to scream. The paperwork speaks louder. That evening we stood across the street again. This time the sheriff's office delivered the formal orders, a legally binding notice to vacate or cease further claim. Two officers knocked. One waited by the gate. Vernon answered stone-faced. Mara stood just behind him, arms folded like she was bracing for a storm. This house was always meant for the family, Vernon told the officers. She's emotionally unstable. Ask anyone, she's never been grounded. They didn't argue with the law, they just performed for it. I stayed hidden behind the passenger seat window, recording the interaction, their tone, their language, their gall. Not because I needed more proof, but because watching it unfold in real time made something inside me anchor. The more they spoke, the more they exposed themselves. That night, the silence in Nora's apartment felt alive. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the fridge, carried the weight of unfinished battles. I'd just finished debriefing with Nora. Barbara had logged the day's progress. I finally sank into the couch, ready to rest for the first time in weeks, when my phone buzzed. No caller ID. The screen glowed in the dark, pulsing like a warning. I didn't answer. I just stared until the voicemail icon appeared, that tiny symbol of intrusion. Then I hit play. A man's voice, low, unfamiliar, but unmistakably connected to them. You think you've won something? A pause, breath dragging like a blade. You haven't seen what we're capable of. No name, no specifics, just venom disguised as calm. I didn't flinch. I forwarded the voicemail to Barbara without a word. The fear they wanted me to feel had evolved into something sharper, resolve. The next morning, before dawn, Nora's text lit up my screen with 5 words that froze my blood. Check your credit report now. Still in pajamas, I sat at her kitchen table, opening her laptop. I typed my password once, twice, 3 times before it took. The page loaded and the cold started in my chest. 2 new inquiries. One from a department store I hadn't entered in years. Another from a credit card company I'd never heard of. Both filed under my name. Both from an IP address traced to my parents' house. I stared at the screen, numb. They're using my name, I whispered. They're not done with the house. They're going after my entire life. Nora leaned in, eyes narrowing. This isn't emotional anymore, she said. This is financial fraud. I nodded slowly, fury tightening every muscle. It's a trap, I said, and they've been building it for years. I dug through old emails, the ones I'd archived but never deleted. And there it was, proof of how long this had been in motion. An email from my mother, Mara, 2 years ago. Send me your social security number for the accountant. Another from my father. Forward your W-2 so I can double-check something before you file. And like a fool, I had sent them, because back then, I thought compliance earned love. That obedience built trust. By noon, Nora and I were in Barbara's office downtown. It felt different this time, less sterile, more like a war room. I slid my laptop across the desk. They've crossed into identity theft, I said. What do we do next? Barbara didn't blink. We file fast. Her voice was clean, surgical. She began drafting an emergency petition for a restraining order, this time expanding it beyond the house to include financial manipulation and digital fraud. I handed her everything, every email, every document, every foolish trace of loyalty I'd once mistaken for love. Nora leaned forward, watching me with quiet conviction. You're not a victim anymore, she said softly. You're a litigant. The words didn't soothe me, but they clarified me. That evening, I stepped out onto Nora's balcony, the city buzzing far below. I wanted the air to wash the day off me, to cool the fury. Instead, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months, Aunt Vera. I hesitated, then answered. Marissa, she began, voice tight, already defensive. Can we just talk like adults? I'm listening. There's a lot of upset right now, she said. You airing family business to lawyers. It's not how we solve things. I almost laughed. I tried solving things at a dinner table, I said. You remember how that ended? She sighed. I'm not defending what they did, but you need to understand how this looks. Lawsuits, police reports. You're making yourself look ungrateful. Ungrateful. That word again. The family's favorite weapon. I exhaled slowly. Gratitude doesn't include silence when someone steals from you. She said my name again, softer this time, like tone could rewrite reality. I'm done, Vera, I said. I'm not your project. I'm not their puppet. I'm the only one in this family who's built something without stealing it first. Then I hung up. And for the first time after a family call, I didn't cry. I didn't even shake. I just sat there, phone still warm in my hand, watching the first light of morning climb over the city, and realized the thing they'd always underestimated. I wasn't trying to survive anymore. I was preparing to win. After dinner, Nora and I were hunched over her desktop, sorting through folders when my inbox chimed. A new email. No sender name I recognized. Subject line, evidence, play in private. There was no message, just a single audio file sitting there like a loaded gun. My pulse spiked. I met Nora's eyes. She leaned forward. Play it. I hesitated for one breath, then tapped the screen. What came through wasn't noise, it was a plan. At first, all I heard was the low hum of a car engine. Then Vernon's voice, calm and detached, filtered through the speakers. We start with the key, he said, like he was reciting a grocery list. Once she's out, change the locks and slowly shift everything. She'll push back, but it won't hold in court if it looks like a family matter. Aaron's laugh followed, light and practiced. She'll cry first. Then she'll call a lawyer. By then, Vernon replied, the narrative's ours. I didn't move. Nora was frozen across from me, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. The audio played on for another minute, details about switching the Wi-Fi, reassigning utilities, even moving my possessions. None of it was emotional. None of it sounded like a father and daughter. It was a strategy session. When it ended, I saved the file in 3 separate locations. Then we sent it to Barbara immediately. Less than an hour later, we were in a courthouse conference room. Everything printed, labeled, organized. Barbara handed the clerk a thumb drive and a signed emergency motion. Within 2 hours, a judge had reviewed it. An official hearing was set for the following week. When we walked out of that building, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow but sharper, like glass cracked down the middle but not yet shattered. That night, back at Nora's, I opened my laptop and logged into a private support forum. I'd been a silent member for months, scrolling through other women's unravelings. Financial abuse, emotional coercion, estate manipulation. This time I posted a redacted version of my story. No names, no sentiment, just facts. By morning, there were over 300 comments. I thought I was crazy. This happened to my sister. My parents did the same thing, but I didn't catch it in time. I didn't respond to them all. I didn't need to. Just knowing I wasn't the first or the only was enough to pull some oxygen back into my chest. Later that afternoon, a reporter from Denver messaged me privately. "Hi Marissa, I saw your post in the forum. We're doing a series on financial fraud inside families. Would you be willing to speak, even off the record?" I didn't reply, but I didn't delete the message either. Somewhere between lunch and sunset, the ripple reached them. Barbara called to tell me Vernon had gotten a call from an old business partner. The man had asked, "Is that your daughter in the post about real estate fraud?" Vernon didn't answer. He just ended the call. Mara's text came just after sunset. One word. Why? No punctuation, no apology. Just that single syllable. Like confusion could erase conspiracy. I stared at the screen, then locked it without replying. An hour later, an anonymous email hit my inbox. A forwarded announcement from a women's leadership conference. Isolde's name had been quietly removed from the speaker lineup she'd been bragging about for months, apparently being linked to an active legal case involving family property theft didn't sit well with their board. The ripple was spreading. That night, I sat on Nora's windowsill, city lights flickering below, and opened the courthouse portal. My case was live. My name, my documents, my hearing date. I whispered it to myself, letting the words taste like ownership. "This is mine," I said, "not just the case, the story." The courthouse looked the same that morning. Stone walls, marble floors, the faint smell of paper and coffee, but I wasn't the same woman walking through its doors. Barbara met me at the steps, her blazer pressed sharp enough to cut glass. 2 manila folders tucked under her arm. Nora followed close behind, notepad in hand, steady and silent. She wasn't there to speak. She was there to witness, to counter every time they'd told me I'd imagined it. We passed through security, then waited outside the courtroom. My hands were clasped together, grounding me. No trembling today, not anymore. "Let them say it," Nora whispered. "Let them say it with their own mouths." Inside, the air felt colder than I remembered from my clerkship years. Vernon sat at the defense table, posture rehearsed, wearing a suit that screamed presentation, not remorse. Mara sat beside him, eyes flicking nervously from the judge to the floor. Across from them, Erin, composed but brittle, crossed her legs, her jaw locked tight. The bailiff called the case. Barbara opened clean and efficient. No embellishment, no theatrics. She presented the timeline, the documents, and finally the recording. Vernon and Erin discussing how to change locks, shift utilities, and rewrite my ownership into a family matter. When it ended, the courtroom was so silent I could hear the air conditioning hum. The judge looked at Vernon. "Mr. Lane, you may speak." He rose slowly, buttoning his jacket like it was armor. "We supported our daughter for years," he said evenly. "This is a misunderstanding. We were trying to protect family assets." Barbara didn't even glance up from her notes. "Mr. Lane," she interrupted, polite but firm, "do you deny submitting false ownership claims to Crestview Bank?" "I deny any criminal intent," he snapped. If she had just listened, none of this would have happened. His voice cracked on the last word. The judge noticed. Then came Erin's turn. She adjusted her scarf, performing calm. "I was only helping my parents organize the property," she said. "The place was always meant for the family. Marissa doesn't even like entertaining. It's not like she used that office anyway." Barbara didn't argue. She simply raised a single printed photo, the still frame of Erin from my security footage, removing folders labeled with my name and placing them neatly into a box marked with her initials. The judge leaned forward. "You believed the space was yours?" Erin hesitated. It felt like shared responsibility." "You're not on the deed, are you?" Erin didn't answer. The silence did it for her. Then it was my turn. I walked to the stand slowly, took the oath, and sat. My palms were steady, my voice clear. "I bought that house alone," I began. "I paid every mortgage installment myself. My father and sister entered my home without permission. My mother packed my belongings while I was at work, and when I questioned it, they called me unstable." I paused, let the quiet stretch until it hurt. "They didn't just try to take a house," I said. "They tried to erase the woman who built it." No tears, no dramatics, just truth. The judge took a long breath before speaking. Mara's eyes found mine across the table. For the first time since that dinner, she looked like she might speak. But Vernon's hand brushed her arm, and the moment died the same quiet death as before. "This court finds sufficient evidence that Miss Lane is the sole legal owner of the property. The restraining order will remain in effect. The court also finds grounds to open an inquiry into potential financial misconduct." Vernon inhaled sharply. Mara didn't look at me. Erin clenched her fists under the table. I didn't react, not in that room. I didn't need to, because for the first time, they were the ones on record. Outside the courthouse, under the blinding midday sky, a reporter stepped into my path. "Miss Lane, do you consider this justice?" I didn't hesitate. I looked straight into the lens. Justice is knowing I never have to explain myself to them again. But justice isn't the same as restoration. A verdict can give you back the deed, but not the scent of your home, not the way your floorboards sound under your own feet. The house still carried their fingerprints like a crime scene that hadn't been dusted. When the lock finally turned, it felt like the house itself was testing me, asking if I still belonged. The key resisted, then clicked. Silence. No trace of eucalyptus in the air, the scent I'd chosen for comfort. Instead, lavender plugins, Mara's favorite. The curtains were stiffer, a dusty blue instead of the cream ones I'd hemmed myself. Even the floor seemed quieter, like it had grown used to someone else's footsteps. I dropped my bag at the door and stood still for a long time. Then, one drawer at a time, I began undoing them. The bookshelf in the living room was stacked with magazines I didn't read. A vase I'd never bought sat where my favorite ceramic picture had been. I gathered each item carefully, boxing them one by one, labeling the cartons theirs. Not out of spite, out of clarity. Every drawer I opened reminded me they'd been here, moving through my space with no regard. But now they weren't. And I was. In the kitchen, tucked behind the silverware tray, I found a cream envelope. My name in Mara's handwriting, inside a single-page note. "You'll understand someday. Family decisions are complex. You were always headstrong, but we meant well. This was about preserving what matters. You'll see that one day. No apology, no remorse." I stepped out back, grabbed the metal cover of the fire pit, and lit the corner of the page with a match. The flame curled through her words like it had been waiting for it. Ash lifted into the late afternoon sky until nothing remained but the warm grate and silence. "I understand perfectly," I said to no one. That weekend, I knocked on the neighbor's door, the same one who'd once quietly warned Nora. Mrs. Kavanaugh answered in her cardigan and wool slippers, surprised but kind. "I brought cookies," I said, holding out a foil-covered tray, "and maybe just wanted to say thank you." She invited me in without hesitation. Her home smelled like cinnamon and old carpet. We sat at her kitchen table for nearly an hour sipping weak tea. She told me they'd always suspected something was off, that Mara and Vernon had acted entitled, as though the property had already been theirs. "We didn't want to get in the middle," she said gently, "but I'm glad you stood up." I walked back across the lawn with a strange new feeling in my chest, belonging not to a family, but to a neighborhood, to a place. On Monday morning, Barbara called. "The state's financial crimes unit is moving forward," she said. "They've seen the forged applications. If it connects directly to your father, there could be formal charges." I nodded, pacing my living room in bare feet. "I'm not after revenge," I told her. "I just want it recorded. I want the truth to have a timestamp." That week, I decorated the house for Thanksgiving. Simple garlands on the banister, a new wreath on the door, photos not of blood relatives, but of Nora, of Mrs. Kavanaugh, of Barbara in the courthouse parking lot, smiling in quiet triumph, each frame a correction. The house began to warm again, not from heat, but from presence. Then, just before dusk on Wednesday, I found something on the porch, a manila envelope, no return address. Inside, a photo, my childhood bedroom as it looked when I was 10, but with a thick red X scrawled across the bed. I stood there for a long moment, thumb grazing the corner of the photo. It didn't frighten me, I was exhausted. But I wasn't running anymore. The envelope still sat on the console table the next morning untouched. Just the idea of it, my old bedroom marked with a red X, said more than any threat ever could. I carried it down to the station, filed it, explained what it showed and what it meant. The officer nodded, typed, logged it. "Without a clear sender, without a direct threat, there isn't much we can do," he said gently. "I know," I replied. "That's why it's worse." The week before Christmas, peace had finally started to feel real. White lights framed the porch, music hummed softly inside, and then her car pulled up. No warning, no text, just the low idle of an engine that still smelled like heat and gasoline. Isolde stepped out like a ghost who refused to stay buried. She didn't come to apologize. She came to edit the story. She stood at the gate, clutching her purse like it held the version of herself she wanted me to see. "I was nearby," she said. I didn't respond. Thought maybe we could talk. I watched her for a moment, then stepped aside, just enough to let her in. Her eyes moved across the walls as she walked through. The framed photos caught her attention. Me and Nora outside the courthouse, a Polaroid of me and Mrs. Kavanaugh from Thanksgiving. The walls that once displayed her victories now told mine. "It's quiet in here," she said, sitting on the edge of the couch. "Most peace is," I replied. She hesitated. "I'm not proud of how things happened." None of us expected it to get legal. I sat across from her, my voice even. "You're not here for me. You're here to manage perception, to soften the story before it spreads further." Her mouth twitched. "You think that's all I care about?" "No," I said, leaning forward. "I think you care deeply about being seen as the better daughter." She exhaled, slow. "Maybe I was jealous. Maybe I didn't think you deserved the house." "There it is," I said quietly. She looked away. "That doesn't mean I wanted it to go this far." "But it did," I said. "And you let it." She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. "You don't get to rewrite your role," I said. "Not just because I survived it." That night, a Christmas card slid through my mailbox. Cream envelope, no return address, but the handwriting unmistakable. Inside, a generic winter scene, and below it, wishing you clarity and peace. Mom, tucked between the folds, was a printed quote. "Forgiveness is the scent the violet sheds on the heel that crushed it." No apology, no accountability, just philosophy dressed as grace. I didn't respond, not out of anger, but because forgiveness doesn't always require reconciliation. A few days later, Nora and I walked through the holiday market downtown. String lights draped the rooftops, the air sweet with pine and roasted almonds. "You never spoke publicly?" she said, picking up a handmade mug with a crooked handle. "I didn't need to," I said. She smiled. "Sometimes survival is the louder message than retaliation." The silence I chose wasn't weakness, it was clarity. Back home, I replaced what remained of them. A new security system, mine, chosen and coded by me. Fresh curtains, stained glass in the windows they used to peer through. And then I rolled up the last rug they'd left behind. The hardwood underneath was scratched, imperfect, but solid. Mine. I stood barefoot on that old floor, breathing in the quiet, not closure, not triumph, but peace, the kind that doesn't ask for permission. On Christmas morning, the world outside was dusted in gray snow, like powdered sugar over a cooled cake. My phone buzzed. "Nora, brunch at my place, chosen family only." I didn't bring a gift, I brought peace. When she opened the door, snow on her steps and that sideways grin on her face, I handed her a small bouquet of winter greenery tied with an old kitchen ribbon. "No gift?" she teased. "I brought peace," I said, "and I don't wrap that anymore." The laughter hit me before I even opened the door. Warm, alive, unguarded, Nora's house pulsed with the kind of joy that didn't need permission to exist. For the first time in years, the sound of happiness didn't make me flinch. It made me breathe. I realized peace isn't quiet. It just sounds different when it finally belongs to you. Inside, Nora's kitchen smelled of cinnamon and coffee. Jazz hummed low. A toddler paraded a stuffed bear across the floor like it was leading the parade. Nora moved through it all like a quiet conductor, steady, smiling, holding this little world together. I sat in the corner, sipping cider, watching her. These weren't people I shared blood with, but they were mine. When I returned home that afternoon, the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was whole. I lit a candle by the window and opened my notebook. Light filtered through the stained glass I'd added to the windows, amber, teal, a single triangle of red, pooling across the hardwood like memory made visible. I walked through each room. The office, once a place of doubt, was now a space of calm creation. The living room felt balanced again. The kitchen drawers slid open smoothly, my labels exactly where I'd left them. No rearranging, no correction, no ghosts. The house hadn't changed, I had, and that was enough. A few days later, I found a letter from my old college professor. Inside, a small handwritten note and a quote tucked into the corner. "Freedom isn't the absence of memories, it's knowing they don't own you anymore." I pinned it to my corkboard beside affirmations from women who'd walked through their own private storms. You're allowed to close doors. Some survival looks like silence. That afternoon, another letter arrived, Vernon's handwriting, precise, unapologetic. I shouldn't have let it get that far. I was trying to protect what I built. I didn't realize how much of it was yours. No remorse, just enough humanity to sound like a man rewriting history for himself. I read it once, then filed it away. Not all doors have to slam shut, but some shouldn't ever open again. That night, I stood on my porch, wrapped in Nora's blanket, coffee steaming in my hands. The house behind me was quiet, but not empty. It was mine again, not because the court said so, but because I finally believed it. They tried to take my house, but they couldn't take the woman who built it. And that's what they'll never understand. Survival isn't about getting back what you lost. It's about becoming someone they can't erase.